Hello and welcome to another edition of Depp v. Heard, this time from Nationals Park in Washington DC. I'm watching the Nationals. I've even bought a visor. I have no idea what's going on, no idea. A couple of people explained the basics to me and I'm desperately clinging on to that, but every time I sort of turn around and think about something else, I forget, so I better get to the game. Anyway, this is a special bonus episode 4 during the down week of Depp v. Heard, and it's a National Coalition for Men special, the Ncfm. I had a conversation with Stephen Svoboda and Harry Crouch. Harry Crouch is the president, Stephen is the director of communications for the Ncfm. And they've both taken quite a keen interest in what's been happening with Depp v. Heard. Our conversations don't tie too much to the specifics of the trial, but they spin out into areas which the Ncfm are interested in and which they think the trial has brought to the fore. So I hope you'll enjoy this episode, and I hope you will take something away from what they have to say, starting with Stephen, where I asked him a little bit about what the Ncfm is for and the way that they go about describing themselves.
And what I like to say is we're for genuine gender equality, because men do face certain challenges and women do as well. And look, I mean, are there any people in the world who are like favoring men's rights and not favoring women's rights? Of course there are, but Ncfm isn't about that. I'm not about that. President Harry Crouch isn't about that. Our fallen comrade Mark Angelucci isn't about that. And all three of us have said that the day that Ncfm starts supporting men's rights preferentially over women is the day all three of us resign, and we believe that to this day. So I just want to start off by saying that there's a lot of misunderstandings. I'm a lifelong liberal. I support most issues that liberals support. It's just that I got to the point where I felt like there were two sides to the equation, and I don't like it when one side doesn't get aired fairly. So
how is it that you and the feminists got off on the wrong foot? Because it does seem to me that you're fighting for pretty similar things.
Well, I agree.
And it's really unfair to say the feminists. Let's say some feminists.
Because there's many different factions. I agree. There's many people who call themselves feminists who support us, and we have a number of women who are board members and quite actively involved, almost as many women as men. And I mean, it's quite mind-boggling, really. But here's what happened, I would say, in summary. Women have made tremendous strides, and that's great. That's fantastic. And some people in the women's movement will admit that, some won't, for strategic reasons. And I understand you have to raise money. You can't go to your funders and say, look, things are great. Things are nearly perfect. We've
achieved all our goals.
We have some very incremental improvements we want to make, but really we're 99.9% of the way there. But could you give us some money so we can make it the extra 0.1%? That wouldn't work, would it? And I understand that. And I also understand that because this can't be admitted, people who say things like this and talk about the gains women have made get blackballed and criticized as anti-women, and we have so much to do. I'm sure there are plenty of things that can still be done, but to say that gains haven't been made is just denying the truth. Now let's look at men. Can you even talk about men's issues without people laughing at you? No, you cannot. So we clearly have a ways to go. And look, I don't like the two being connected. I think we need to create genuine gender equality for all. Unfortunately, it has been reified and set up in this way where it's women versus men, which I don't agree with. Women are married to men. Women have men as mothers. Women have men as sisters, as daughters. We're all in this together, folks. It's not a one versus the other thing. You can set it up that way, but you're flying in the face of reality. I'm blessed with a wonderful, amazing marriage, which again, I obtained because I went to a men's rights, genuine gender equity event and talked about a film that I was in. So, which is, by the way, was made by a woman who started off as a straight line feminist and changed her mind based on what she heard. So people can have it however they're going to have it. Some people aren't going to change their minds. Some men get a lot of kudos and positive strokes over being anti their sex. You can do that. You can do that. People do it. I'm just saying there's two sides to every story. You can deny it if you want to. There's still two sides. You deny it, there's still two sides.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, I appreciate your passionate defense of that position. Let's then talk about the Johnny Depp Amber Heard libel trial, which I have been covering over here in Virginia. And I am acutely aware that it isn't just about libel, that it isn't just about one man versus his ex-wife. There are so many people who are taking an interest in this trial, and very many of them have been sort of on Reporting Depp v. Heard, telling me about their various takes on it. And I would like to hear from you directly why you think this could be such an important trial, and what kind of outcome you would like to see, and why.
I mean, in a way, it's funny the way life works, isn't it? Because so many things have happened with Ncfm over the years, and even other organizations that aren't Ncfm that I'm not directly involved in. I mean, I'm the longest serving board member now in Ncfm, and I realized the other day I'm actually the longest serving board member in the entire history of Ncfm. I've been a board member since 1996, and so I knew most of the early guard. I met them in their later years, but I still got to know them. And then along comes Johnny Depp, who I don't even know what his take on these issues were before the whole events that led to the trial happened. Quite likely he hadn't really thought about them, to be honest, like most people. But he's personally affected by it. He's accused of all these things that just don't resonate with him, feel like libel, and probably are libel. And so he brings a lawsuit. And so but the feminists, or some of them, I shouldn't speak for them, but I assume what's been happening is that it can't be admitted that there's two sides to the story, as I was talking earlier. That's a problem to admit that, even though it's the case, and any person who really thinks about it in any sort of semblance of objectivity is going to realize that. But
that's not going to work in a court of law, though, is it? That's the problem. I'm interested in why you said probably are libel. What conclusions have you already drawn about this case?
Well, that was probably an overstatement. I probably shouldn't have said that. But look, if it wasn't a reasonable libel case, it wouldn't have been brought. And given the stakes that people are seeing in this case that go obviously beyond what Amber Heard did and what Johnny Depp did, the issue here isn't really...
You can bring your cat into vision, Stephen, while we talk. Don't worry about that. What's her name?
Her name is Tuxedo Cat.
Hello, Tuxedo Cat.
She's a great cat. She goes for walks with us every night with our dog.
Don't worry, if she wants to get in vision, she's more than welcome. Sorry, I broke your flow there.
Oh, it's okay. I mean, as happens in the U.S. and probably everywhere, but perhaps even more in the U.S. than elsewhere, cases acquire, any events in general acquire significance not related to what's going on at their core. And I think this is a perfect example of it. It isn't getting all the attention it's getting because people care what happens with Johnny Depp, although some people presumably do care. But really, are there two sides to the story? Do men ever have the right to say, I didn't commit domestic violence? I mean, it has been said, and I don't know if you've heard about this, but judges have actually said in court that it's okay to falsely accuse a man of domestic violence because they'll learn from the process, and it'll be educational, and it doesn't really matter if a man's falsely accused. I mean, they're big boys, they'll get over it. And so
that has actually happened in court.
Yeah, it did. It's sort of become a notorious case. It was a family court. I mean, it wasn't a very important case in the scheme of things, except that judges will actually say that, and judges will actually get, I don't know what word I want to use here. They will get told things that are definitely not objective between the sexes, let's say that, about domestic violence. And even the Department of Justice, that well-known, notorious men's rights, biased organization, the Department of Justice, I'm joking, of course, has said that 41% of domestic violence is done against men by women out of the heterosexual domestic violence that happens. And I mean, the number 41% is low. It's actually closer to 50-50. Warren Farrel says it's slightly more than 50% of domestic violence happens.
Well, that's the figure that John Davis quoted at me, which
it's not widely known, and it's surprising at first. I didn't believe it at first myself.
Well, the statistics quoted on your own website is one in three women and 1 in 4 men, or more than 1 in 3 women, more than 1 in 4 men experience domestic
I think
violence
that's
at some stage in
I
their
think that's
life.
the Department of Justice figures. That seemed like
Or
the safest numbers. I didn't put it up there, but I think that's
no.
where
I think it was or the CDC. But it makes the point that the natural assumption or the unnatural assumption that many people have that men are overwhelmingly the perpetrators of domestic violence may not be a bulletproof assumption to make, and it's certainly something that I've had to learn about since I came to this country, and talking to people, talking to many women as well who are supporting Johnny Depp about my assumptions about domestic violence and who are the perpetrators, because there are statistics out there, and I was given one the other day saying that 90% of all violent crime is committed by men, and a very high proportion of that within that is domestic violence. Maybe not 90%, but these are the figures that you hear. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean that Amber Heard isn't making things up. Anything can happen in one particular individual relationship.
Of course.
But just in terms of where my original question about what you would like to see as an outcome from this trial and the effect you would like it to have, i.e., why you have an interest in this as a movement and as an individual, where are you with it? What would you like to see happen?
Well, let me back up first, because there were a couple of things I wanted to say regarding things you were saying along the way. So first of all, and I don't know if you've mentioned this in other interviews, but there's a professor at Cal State Long Beach, I believe it is, and I met with him in person, Martin Feeber, and he put together a bibliography of over 200 studies of domestic violence that were done objectively. Now, a lot of studies come in and aren't done objectively, but of the studies that were done objectively, every single one found that men and women commit domestic violence about equally. So it wasn't one study or 2 studies or 5 studies, over 200. And I think the number's gone up, and you can find that online, Martin Feeber. I met with him about 10 years ago, I think it was.
Are you finding any mainstream traction for those figures? Because they
That's
are not
the thing, is there's no mainstream traction because people don't want to hear it, and because it flies in the face of what these organizations are saying. And if you talk to women on the street or men on the street, I don't think people really buy into the whole feminist line. The whole sort of more radical feminist line, as much as people say they do. I think there's a perception that you need to sort of toe the party line, but people are living their lives, and they're seeing men and they're seeing women, and they see noble men, and they see men being kind, and they see men who have great relationships with their kids and who care about their kids and who are broken up about it, losing their kids. And it just doesn't fly. But what's so frustrating is living with this slanted perception that's so slanted. So I wanted to mention Martin Feeber, and I also wanted to say that Mark Angelucci, our former vice president, who was tragically killed, we're going on 2 years now from when that happened. He was my close friend at my wedding. And he handled so many cases on these issues, and he was particularly strong and supporting justice for both genders. And it's not about men. And he took cases on behalf of women as well. And anyway, he had this one client who was a military veteran and was just beaten repeatedly over and over by his wife, and it went to court. And I met this man numerous times and spent time with him. And these people exist. These people are real people. And it's just, it can be ruining. It can be ruining for a man in that situation. And you don't feel the ability to talk about it in the same way a woman does. First of all, you maybe don't have the skills to do that. And second of all, you don't get the sympathy and understanding. And so if we know that 41% or 50% of domestic violence is happening to men, why aren't 50% of our shelters for men? I think there's 2 shelters in the entire country that accept men and thousands that accept women. That is just so shocking. And that in itself should just stop in tracks anybody who doesn't understand about the injustices that men are facing. I mean, I guess you can not believe the Department of Justice. I guess you can do that, but I don't, it just,
is there a demand though for shelters? I mean, the thing about,
of course there's
female
a demand,
shelters,
but the men know they can't go and they won't be served. So of course there's a demand. I mean, if a man is facing domestic violence and needs to escape for his life, and this man that I knew and many others like him had kids, and he would have taken the kids with him and gone to a shelter if a shelter existed. It's just mind-boggling.
Well, we heard Johnny Depp. I'm sorry to keep bringing it back to Johnny Depp, but
No,
that is
no,
the
no, that's
focus
fine. I just wanted to say
of our
those things, so
podcast.
thank you.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
understand. I mean, we heard Johnny Depp talking about his father being abused by his mother, and that was one
Right.
of the longest pieces of his early testimony, talking about that kind of relationship and how he learned to avoid conflict by walking away from it. But
Right.
in terms, if I can ask you specifically, what is it that
Yeah.
you would like to see as a result of this trial? Whether, not necessarily the verdict, but the effect that the huge amount of airtime this case is getting. What would you like to see come of it that is good?
Well, what would be good would be more discussion about genuine gender equality and how can we create a world that will work for all of us, because we're so intertwined, men and women. And this is the work Warren Farrel does. And he was another one of the four of us that were at that Red Pill showing. And he started off, his first book was sort of a straight line feminist book. And then he, in the late 70s, early 80s, started hearing about men's side of things. And once he stopped doing the standard feminist line, he stopped getting invited onto all the leading talk shows, Mike Douglas and all those other leading talk shows. And he stopped getting the lucrative contracts, but he kept doing it because he believes in what he does. And he's a friend of my wife and mine to this day. But it takes someone like that and someone who's willing to take the multi-million-dollar hit that he took in his earnings to spread the word. And so we're hoping that this trial will help spread the word. And Johnny Depp and Amber Heard might turn out to be the single most important event ever, really, in those that want genuine gender equality, which I would think is all of us. To the extent it isn't all of us, it's primarily based on really a misunderstanding, which is really tragic. So what I hope is that people start discussing this and thinking about it. Oh, wow. How does it happen that men can commit domestic violence, can have domestic violence committed against them? Well, there's two great equalizers. Weapons, women use weapons more often than men do with domestic violence. And surprise, when men are sleeping, when men are asleep, guess what? It doesn't matter how strong you are. If somebody comes at you with a shovel, with a hammer, with a gun, you can be the strongest man in the world. You're still not going to win in that situation. Those are the two great equalizers that women use. And
But aren't
people
more
just don't
women
think of that.
killed?
They imagine a man with fists and a woman with fists, but that's not
Yeah.
usually what it is. I mean, I had a
But
client when I was an immigration lawyer that was a man and a woman, and they both hit each other with fists. It was mutual domestic violence. And I knew these people, and it was tragic. It was happening every day in both directions. So that story, people laugh at it, but it's very sad. It's very tragic. And there were children in their house. The children saw this every day. It's an incalculable tragedy. We need to clean this up because we need to fix this as a society.
Well, what do you make of the term mutual abuse? Because that was something that one of the witnesses, Dr. Laurel Anderson for Johnny Depp, diagnosed as, well, not diagnosed, but said in her notes that she thought was happening in that relationship. And when I pulled that out as a phrase, a number of people said, how dare you? There is no such thing as mutual abuse. There is an abuser and there is a victim. And
because they're afraid that people are going to find out that it's a two-way story, and they're holding up such a fragile house of cards. And I can't believe we got to 2022 with all the social media and everything, and we're still purveying this, I don't know, 1963 myth. It's mind-boggling. Of course there can be mutual abuse. I had a client that had mutual abuse. We've heard stories of this in the Johnny Depp trial. There's so many cases of it. I mean, it's well documented. I mean, people can, you know what, you can argue about anything. There's no country called France. I've never been to it. People say there's a place called France with a capital called Paris. I don't believe it. We went to the moon. We didn't go to the moon. There was a famous athlete saying that recently. The earth is flat. Kyrie Irving, the basketball star, says the earth is flat. Well, I don't know. I went around the world. I traveled in one direction and I came back in 1985. I think the world is probably not flat. That's what I think. Maybe I was duped. Maybe I'm stupid. I don't know. People can believe any darn thing. And nowadays with social media, Facebook, Meta, whatever it's called now,
yeah,
their algorithms reinforce that. So it's actually gotten worse than it used to be.
Well, let's just talk briefly about
What a
social
sad
media,
world we
because,
live in.
well, I have some concerns about social media, not least the way that it seems to be stifling debate and can stifle debate in one direction or another. A lot of Johnny Depp supporters say that basically he was cancelled. He was cut out. The allegation of domestic abuse against him meant that he no longer had a voice, and his career was pretty much cut stone dead. And now we're seeing this tidal wave of support for Johnny Depp on social media, which is having the effect of cancelling out the other voices. Amber Heard has become a pariah, and whether she wins this case or not, there are enough people who have taken what they have from the court cases it's been beamed around the world of her testimony and decided that she should no longer have a voice. So is the rise of social media something that has become toxic to this wider debate, or do you think it's been helpful?
I mean, I'll tell you, victim culture is a big problem for us, and people just need to grow up, man up, woman up. Life is tough. Not everything is roses and little fairies. And you know what? You might be a little uncomfortable sometimes in your life, and you sort of just need to learn how to deal with that. And nobody's being silenced. We're having a trial. There's cross-examination, there's direct examination. People just need to grow up. And
but isn't that exactly the sort of language that abused men are often told that they need to do, that they need to just, man up, get over it, stop worrying about it?
Of course it is. Of course it is. And look, I mean, it's terrible in both directions. Of course it's terrible in both directions. Do I even need to say this? Yes, I do. Domestic violence against women is horrible. It's terrible. You know what? Domestic violence against men isn't really so hunky-dory either. And a lot of these things we tell ourselves that made us feel like it wasn't that bad. Men are tough, men are strong, they don't really get hurt that much. Yeah, it happens both ways, but women get hurt worse. All those things are not really true. And I've been in Ncfm since 1996. I mean, I've heard so many excuses, and at some point you just sort of say, really? We're in 2022 and this is really still what's happening?
My thanks to Stephen Svoboda for his time. Let's then get a take on Harry Crouch and his interest in the Depp v. Heard trial. Now, I don't know how much interest you've been taking in the case Depp v. Heard, but it's obviously something that has got social media all of a frenzy, and there's a lot of talk about it out in the West Coast, where, of course, the two protagonists were based. And even in the UK, it's been making headlines as well. Have you been taking a close interest, or is it more of a passing interest? And what conclusions have you drawn of it so far?
That's a loaded question. I'm not sure if my interest hasn't even been passing. However, I have taken note of the trial, and of course we have a live feed going on. So from an organizational standpoint, we give it great importance because it's an opportunity to show as many people who are interested some of the issues that we've been involved with for decades, trying to explain to people that reality is not always what you think it is. So this is a great opportunity for that.
I was speaking to one attorney who I bumped into outside court actually last week, and he said that he thinks the reverberations from this trial could flow forward through American culture for many decades to come. And he was trying to say that this could be on a level of O.J. Simpson, or the 4 acquitted police officers who were accused of beating Rodney King, and even the Michael Jackson trial, sort of all rolled into one. I wasn't quite sure what he was getting at, but I know that there are an awful lot of cultural fault lines running through this trial. So just pick apart some of them for us. Why is it of interest to Ncfm, for instance?
Well, first, Ncfm, or the National Coalition for Men, we're the oldest organization or type on the planet as far as we know. We've been around for 45 years. So we're involved in a lot of different things. But certainly one of the things we're involved with is false allegations. And we're involved in it so deeply that last year at our national board meeting, we decided to make false allegations our primary priority for this particular year. And that being said, we were fortunate to come across Lori DeVoe, and we helped her start Ncfm chapter Women Against False Allegations. False allegations, and in my view and many others, are the bane of our culture and society. Just think about it. If you were to hold people who make false allegations accountable for their actions, think about what would happen to our legal system. It would almost implode. Think about what would happen. Well,
isn't the problem with false allegations that we don't know which ones are false?
Well, that's the rub, isn't it? I mean, that's the rub. You know, and it's very complicated. It's not as easy as some people think it might be. You know, particularly when you run into possibility of character disorders, personality defects, you know, financial gain, you know, wars over child custody, all sorts of things come into play that cause people to falsely accuse others, sometimes maliciously, sometimes simply wrongly, because we all know how useless often are eyewitness testimonies. I mean, and there's case after case after case after case after case to substantiate that statement. So eyewitness not always reliable.
Well,
False
why?
allegations.
I mean, what can be done about false allegations? I mean, I appreciate there are many people saying that you know these aren't false allegations in the Depp v. Heard case, and that's been proven in a court of law in London already. But on the wider point about false allegations, so much interpersonal violence and domestic violence happens behind closed doors. How could the law be less of a blunt tool when it comes to passing what the truth of the situation is?
I love that phrase, violence behind closed doors. About 15 years ago, PBS did a documentary behind closed doors. And we took a look at it. I went to one of the premieres in San Diego, took a look at it. And we filed complaints with PBS, and their own ombudsman in 2 separate investigations found out that there's no substance in that particular PBS documentary. It violated almost all their policies with respect to reporting the truth.
So what's the issue with behind closed doors then, specifically as a term?
Well, it's been a long time if you're going to check my memory. However, my recollection, some of the issues were that I think there were 3 or 4 particular stories that they were interested in.
Oh no, sorry, not in that specific film, but the concept of most violence taking place behind closed doors.
What's the question? What's wrong with the concept?
Yeah, because you picked up on my phrase. Because the assumption is that violence, domestic violence, interpersonal violence, there are often no witnesses. It happens behind closed doors, and that is why it's so difficult to work out what's going on.
Well, I think that's accurate. You know, but the domestic violence industry now is a major part of the women industries, and in the past 20 years, it has become very sophisticated in a lot of different fronts. Whether it be on post-secondary education campuses with disciplinary procedures, or whether it be in the criminal courts or the family courts or dependency courts, you name it. The domestic violence industry has sunk its teeth in all of those things under the guise of...
You make it sound like you think it's a malign industry. Because of course the people who are helping other women escape relationships involving violence think they're doing a good thing for obvious reasons.
That's one of the problems, because they say helping other women. Domestic violence, intimate partner violence is not gender specific. It never has been, and it never will be. There's all sorts of research out there, and you can find it yourself. It's easy for anybody to find. John Hamel.
Sure, but what's wrong with where is the harm in trying to help people? Because you call this an industry and you say sunk its teeth in it as if it's a pejorative thing, but it may not be balanced in terms of the way that it approaches gender, but the people who are working within it simply want to create safe spaces and get women to safety, and they don't see that as a bad thing.
Kind of like the woman in Florida who was in charge of domestic violence programs down there, making $500,000 a year. You think she was in the business only so she could help people? That's ridiculous. You know, there's a lot of reasons.
I don't think people go into domestic violence industry to make money, do they? I mean,
sure.
there are a lot more lucrative industries than that.
Sure there are. And some people have the skills to make more money in other industries. But make no mistake, none whatsoever. The domestic violence industry is big business, big, huge business. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people making good livings in the domestic violence industry. Then you have to ask the question, well, how many people actually get help? We've taken apart budget after budget of some of these nonprofit organizations in which you find there's millions of dollars going towards salaries, benefits, travel, conferences, And when you get down and look at the money being spent on programs, it's a small part of their total budget.
Hmm.
A lot of
But,
it has to do with
but I mean, are you suggesting that these organizations, this industry is causing harm? Because the people working within it would argue that they're not. They're helping people escape domestic violence.
I've made no such suggestion.
Okay.
However,
Go on, what are you saying?
I would say they could provide more help. I can remember years ago, I had a business partner and we had a vocational counseling rehabilitation firm working with hard-to-serve groups. And we managed federal programs through pass-through dollars in the state of Alaska for the municipality of Anchorage. And all those programs that I've seen, they'll have an end game. You're supposed to work so far to get people to a certain point, and then the money runs out and you kick them out of the program. I don't care what you label it. The difference is, I remember when a group of women first came up in Anchorage 40 years ago or so. And at that time, I was involved with this Anchorage suicide and crisis line. I forget what the official name. And the mayor sent an emissary to come over to see us and said, well, we have these women just going up from Lower 48 and they want to open a program and we need $90,000 in matching funds. So we got to take your $90,000 budget and give it to them. And they did that. And they closed down our suicide intervention program, which was available to help everybody in the community. And they gave the money to this other group of individuals who started Anchorage Women Resource Center, I believe. And one of the first things they did was buy into the Duluth Model of anger management, which has been disproven so many times.
Tell me about this may be news to people who are watching this YouTube channel, but I keep hearing about the Duluth model. Tell me about the Duluth model and why it gained so much purchase, because a lot of people do seem to see it as very problematic nowadays, and a lot of people obviously still see it as very helpful.
Well, I don't know anybody that sees it as helpful, but I'll take that on face value. The if you were to go look at the Duluth Power and Control Wheel, one thing you'll recognize, it's all about women, not about men. So and it's 30-some states by law. It's the program that needs to be offered for better intervention. It's one of those programs that tries to solve a problem for half of it, not all of it. Aside from which, it's founded on some misconceptions. And yet, a lot of the domestic violence programs, better intervention programs, have been founded on it, believe in it, and preach it.
So just give me an example of how the Duluth model might be implemented in an environment like that and why you think that is wrong.
Sure. In the Duluth model, let's say you've been arrested for domestic violence. And so you go to court, and basically what the judge says is, hey, look, apparently there's a problem here. So you don't have any priors and things are okay. So I'm going to order you into better intervention program. 52 weeks, you go once a week. And oh, by the way, you get to pay for it. Okay, it's not subsidized. You get to pay for it. It's one of the punishments. And so you go and the first day you go to your program and you have to sign a contract admitting guilt. Whether you actually were the perpetrator or not, you could have been the victim, but you absolutely have to admit guilt. Otherwise, they say you're in denial and not in compliance with the court order. Now, just think about that.
Well, that's how it works in the courts in this country. If you commit a crime and you want to be considered for parole, you have to first of all acknowledge that you were guilty of the crime that you were convicted of.
That's not always the case, by the way. I don't know how many felons you've worked with, but I've worked with a lot, and I can assure you, just because you have the label of felon slapped on your head does not necessarily mean you're guilty of committing a crime. But those are stories for another discussion. So what happens if you get ordered into these better intervention programs? Getting beyond what I just said, then you go through 50 2 weeks of basically indoctrination based upon what the people of, in this particular discussion, the Duluth model, say are important for you to understand as a batterer. Now, for years, did they have any battery intervention programs for women? They did not. So why is that? Do you think the people in the industry really believed that women were nonviolent and could not abuse a man? That'd be ridiculous to believe that. Absolutely, you'd have to be brain dead to believe that. Including the people in the domestic violence industry who push these programs forward. They know. There's lots of studies and research out there. And answer this one. If that's true, if all men are perpetrators and all women are victims, tell me about same-sex relationships.
Haven't we gone beyond that concept though, that all men are perpetrators and all women are victims, or is that still holding sway in mainstream thinking?
Yeah, I think we're going beyond it, but if we were, we wouldn't be having this discussion. And I wouldn't be hearing questions about, isn't it a good thing that we're trying to help women? Well, of course it is. Is it a bad thing that we're trying to help women? No, of course it's not. You know, in my views, those questions simply don't reflect reality. A lot of it's politics.
Do you think a lot of it, I mean, aside from maybe the sort of the industry and the politics, do you not have some sympathy with the view of women who said they've fought for long and hard to create safe spaces, to create positions of equality, or to create environments where women would be heard and believed if they called out their partner for domestic violence? And then suddenly you get a bunch of men coming along going, well, hang on a minute, we need to have a conversation about us as well. Can you just not even on a human level sympathize with that feeling? It's like, oh God, here we go again. You know, we've just created this environment that is just about creating something for us. And a bunch of men want to get in on the conversation as well.
Well, see, that attitude, something for us. I don't think that way. The National Coalition for Men, you know, for years we've been committed to the removal of harmful gender-based stereotypes against men, boys, their families, and women who love them. That's 99% of us. We have a lot of women in our organization. We welcome them with open arms, and we're all about making the world a better place for all of us. So do I sympathize or empathize? Sure. With people who struggle to make the world a better place for everybody? Absolutely. Do I sympathize with people who only want to make the world a better place for them or the people like them? Absolutely not. Never. In no sense of the word. I think it's shameful. Absolutely shameful. When we talk about violence, we should be looking for solutions to end violence. It's not gender specific, period. It's not complicated. If you want to end intimate partner violence, take a look at intimate partner violence from all sides of the issue. I said it before, I'll say it again. You can't solve a problem by only solving for half of it. That's stupid.
So
what's the motivation?
Yeah,
it basically boils down to money.
Do you think is that your conclusion, that it's about money? Is that to do with funding models?
I'll be glad to say it again. Absolutely.
So let's go back to Depp v. Heard, because one of the concepts that was raised by one of the therapists for the couple was that there was mutual abuse going on in that relationship. And it was a phrase that is, I've discovered, hotly contested, because people say, no, you can't have mutual abuse. You can have an abuser and a victim. And if the abuser wants to muddy the waters and start gaslighting their victim, they can accuse them of abuse. Where do you stand on that particular issue?
Where do I stand? What's the issue?
Mutual abuse. Do you think it's a valid terminology for what might go on in a domestic relationship?
You lost me. I don't understand the question, but I'm getting
the idea that two people in a toxic relationship can mutually abuse each other.
Sure, they can. I mean, the answer is sure. Why not? You know,
just because when I raised this, some Johnny Depp supporters who are very much convinced that Amber Heard is the abuser in the relationship between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard said, no, you can't have mutual abuse. It's a triggering term. It's a gaslighting term. It's a weapon used by the abuser to muddy the waters about what's going on in a relationship.
I see where you're coming from. Well, once again, anybody opens their eyes or anybody knows anything about this business could not deny that that's a possibility. But what's really interesting, though, Johnny Heard, Johnny Depp, Amber Heard. You know, we've got alcoholism and drug abuse on one side, and we've got what on the other? Maybe a borderline personality disorder. Oh shit, which is like a pissed off cobra on steroids. Wow. You know, anybody with BPD, they're very dangerous. You should get far away from them as possible. But with that scenario in mind, does it set the stage for mutual abuse? Absolutely. Does that mean mutual abuse happen? Not necessarily.
One of the arguments I often hear from the feminist perspective is that it is a traditional thing to do to mark someone who is raising their hand and complaining of domestic abuse as being mentally ill. They don't know what they're talking about because they're mentally ill. It's very easy to categorize someone and therefore dismiss them as being mentally ill in order to dismiss their claims of abuse. And this has happened, you know, for at least a century. That's how you stop a woman from raising a hand, by saying, well, look, she's obviously ill. She doesn't know what she's talking about. And that's happening again in this case.
Well, just because a person has borderline personality disorder doesn't mean they don't know what they're talking about, because they usually do, but they do get confused. There is a real thing called borderline personality disorder. And some of the feminist groups, they simply take an opposite position to anything that criticizes anything to do with a woman's behavior because it's not good for business. I know that sounds trite. However, let's say there's been a fight over parental alienation with the DSM-4 for years. A lot of the feminist groups and national organization jump up and down and shout that there's no such thing. But there's confusion in the argument. The real debate is over parental alienation syndrome versus parental alienation. Once again, you have to be brain dead to think that when there's a contested divorce situation or contested separation and children involved, that one or more of the parties involved are not going to try to poison the children just because their emotions are running so high. They're angry, they're frustrated, they're fearful of the future. All these various things are running through their brains, and they take it out on the children sometimes, not even knowing that. But the parental alienation syndrome is the consequence of alienation on the children, how it shapes their behavior. And what the feminist groups do, they really argue strongly about that. Again, you know, if you ever work with a high conflict situation, or if you work with children in that capacity, you can see it, right? So what happens politically? Well, they have to take that position to maintain the image, whether stated openly or not, all men bad, all women good. It's not complicated. It's really not complicated. However, in those situations, they can't produce any valid scientific research to substantiate their claims. And if you look at what research they do bring forward, it's usually research done by Miss Magazine, the National Organization of Women, ACLU. I mean, these are questionable organizations in terms of where their loyalties lie.
I'm intrigued that I keep coming back to this sense that you think that feminism is some kind of racket, and that the desire to protect women from abuse it has turned into some kind of racket.
Well, I think feminism is a misused term. I'm not even sure feminism exists anymore, in the strictest sense. A racket?
What do you mean by that in the strictest sense?
Well, over the years, it's all the issues have become a bit more diverse. You know, the big time feminists who jumped up and down and made a bunch of accusations and wrote books and caused the movement to take a certain shape. A lot of them have now died. The women's studies programs have taken root. The first one, I think, was San Diego State University in 1972. Now there's at least 1,000 of them throughout the world. And that the women's studies program takes an ideological bent wherever they go. And you can't think they don't, because the name is women's studies. So it tells you on its face what it's about, right? You can't be confused about that. If you took the word women's studies and you drew and you dropped the WO from women and the STU from studies, you have an interesting result. And to some degree, that's true, because what you end up with is men die. There are a number of people in that specific mental outlook that not only believe that, but have been openly professing it for years.
Harry, I'd love to continue pursuing this line of thought with you, but I'm afraid we're getting very, very close to the end of our allotted time. I just want to ask you one more question to try and bring this back to Depp v. Heard. What would be the ideal outcome for you, and what effect would it have?
Ideal outcome of what?
The Depp v. Heard trial.
Whatever comes from that trial, I hope it is based upon what people to believe the truth is. Whichever way it goes, it has already brought information to the world that I think will open a lot of eyes and help millions of people better understand about domestic violence, and perhaps cause other people to come forward and find those solutions that we've been looking for decades.
Well, my thanks to Harry, and before that, my thanks to Stephen from the National Coalition for Men. Whilst you've been watching that, I'm afraid not much has been happening here. The Nationals are not having a good season, and they're not winning tonight. Still, everything could change in the ninth innings. Probably won't, though. Thanks very much for watching this far, and court starts again on Monday the 16th, so I will go back to doing park bench interviews outside court, but I've also got some extra ones that I've recorded, remote park bench interviews, which I'll pop on the end of various days court next week. We've got 4 more days, all starting at 9 o'clock, so it's time to stop having the fun and getting my nose firmly back attached to the grindstone. Take care, and thanks for sticking with it this far. If you want to support Reporting Depp v. Heard, all you have to do is go to reportingdeppvheard.net/newsletter and sign up to the newsletter. We've got hundreds and hundreds of people subscribed now, and it is quite an army of correspondents who like to not only know what's going on at the end of each day, but also get in touch and tell me what they think about everything to do with this Depp trial, including my journalism and including what's been happening in court, which they are more than welcome to do. So if you want to subscribe, you're more than welcome. reportingdeppvheard.net/newsletter, and you can join the gang. All right, take care. Go Nationals.